Peppa Pig is a show filled with a lot of mysteries, and in today's video we're going to talk about some of them. As we all know, there are talking vegetables in Peppa Pig, and their existence by itself is already a big mystery. On top of that, we've got Super Potato, who basically is the Superman of Peppa Pig's universe. So, where does Super Potato's powers come from? This question is really intriguing. Whenever we see Super Potato coming on the scene, he almost always appears flying from the sky. And unlike other talking vegetables like Mrs. Carrot, who uses a thick rope to simulate that she is flying, which even the children in the audience notice, Super Potato really has the ability to fly. Moreover, he also has unreal strength, as we see when he manages to save Mr. Potato from his car where he got stuck. So the big question is, where do these powers of this talking potato come from? Was he born with them, or did he acquire them over time? One of the popular Peppa Pig theory states that the talking vegetables were the results of some sort of scientific experiment. But if they were really the result of an experiment, then why didn't other vegetables get the superpower? We can't say for sure if this is true or not, but surely this is still one of the biggest mysteries in Peppa Pig. Aunt Dottie is probably the most mysterious character in Peppa Pig. So, where does Aunt Dottie live? Peppa and George have an aunt named Dottie. We know she is their aunt, but we aren't sure if she is Daddy Pig's sister or Mummy Pig's sister. What we do know is that Dottie doesn't know Peppa and George very well, at least not from what they remember. Also, she lives very far away from England, so far that when she sends them a gift, which is a shiny wheeled horse, she has to write a letter explaining where she is from. This letter makes it clear that she is in a distant country. We still don't know exactly where Aunt Dottie lives, but we can tell you where she definitely does not live. First, she does not live in England since that is where Peppa and George already live. She also does not live in France, which is the country next to England. This is because when Peppa's family goes to France, they meet Delphine and her family, not Aunt Dottie. The same thing happens with the USA. When Peppa's family goes to Hollywood to receive an award and meet Super Potato, they travel all across America, but Aunt Dottie is not mentioned or seen. Some fans think Aunt Dottie might live in Russia, which is a very big country, even bigger than the USA. This idea comes from an episode where Madame Gazelle plays a game about different countries. In this episode, George wears a special Russian outfit that could have been a gift from Aunt Dottie for International Day. This seems like a good guess, but the people who make the show haven't confirmed it yet. Going back to the potatoes in Peppa Pig, there's another mystery surrounding them. Are Super Potato and Mr. Potato brothers? This is because the two characters are almost completely identical. So much so that many even thought that they were the same person until the episode where Super Potato saves Mr. Potato. So are these potatoes related? In the show, we have seen that the characters who are very similar, like Daddy Pig and Uncle Pig, are brothers. They have small differences in their beards that distinguish them. However, in the case of the two luminous characters we're talking about, even their mustaches are identical, with only their outfits differing. So, the possibility arises that makes perfect sense. Are Super Potato and Mr. Potato twin brothers? Another popular mystery in Peppa Pig has to do with George, and some of you might have guessed it already. The mystery is George adopted? As we know, the full name of main character of the show is Peppa Pig, and she is referred to as such by several characters in the show. However, when it comes to her brother, we practically never hear anyone referring to him as George Pig. Similarly, the parents of the two always have their last names spoken when they are mentioned, always being called Daddy Pig and Mommy Pig. So, does George not have the last name Pig? If that's not his last name, then what would it be? George's last name is never mentioned in the show. But in the episode Edmund Elephant's Birthday, Peppa's family receives a mail with an invitation for George, inviting him to attend the birthday party of Edmund Elephant. In the invitation, they refer to him by his full name and use the surname Pig at the end, George Pig. However, if you stop to analyze, perhaps Edmund's family simply assumed that George had the last name Pig and put it on the invitation. This idea is supported by the fact that we never hear anyone in his family calling him by the last name Pig. If we look closely at the show Peppa Pig, we can see a fun pattern with the names of the characters. Almost all the kids have names where the first letter of their first name matches the first letter of their last name, which also tells us what kind of animal they are. For example, take Edmund Elephant. His last name is Elephant. and both his first name and last name start with the letter E. The same thing happens with his sister, Emily Elephant. There are other characters that fit this pattern too. For instance, Peppa Pig has both her first and last name starting with the letter P. Then we have the twin sisters, Peggy and Pandora Panda, who also start with P, just like Peppa. And we can't forget Pedro Pony, whose name follows the same rule. And in addition to the characters we've already talked about, we can also look at the entire rabbit family. This family includes the two youngest members, who are named Rose and Rob, and their older siblings, Rebecca and Richard. All of them share the last name Rabbit. Other examples of this naming pattern include Susie Sheep and Danny Dog, who also have matching initials for their first and last names. However, Peppa's little brother is named George Pig, and that's where things get a bit different. His initials are G and P, which don't match like the other characters. If George had always been part of the pig family, and they picked his name, they might have chosen a name that also starts with P. Of course, it's possible that George was adopted and already had his name from the orphanage, which would explain why it doesn't fit the pattern. But we also have other characters who don't follow the same rule, like Peppa and George's cousins, Chloe and Alexander. But so far, we haven't heard anything from the show's creators about this mystery. Mrs. Rabbit is one of the well-known characters in Peppa Pig, and she's well known for having a lot of jobs. But you should know that there is more than one Miss Rabbit. So far, no one knows how many Miss Rabbits are there exactly, and many fans get a bit mixed up and think that Mrs. Rabbit is actually Rebecca's mom. But that's not correct. In reality, Mrs. Rabbit is the aunt of Peppa's friend, because she is the twin sister of Mummy Rabbit. This becomes clear in the episode called Mummy Rabbit's Bump. In that episode, we see both Mrs. Rabbit and Mummy Rabbit at the hospital. Mrs. Rabbit is working as a nurse, while Mummy Rabbit is there to have her twins. Speaking of twins, this brings up another question. Just how many rabbit sisters are there? We know that rabbits tend to have a lot of babies, like Mummy and Daddy Rabbit, who have 4 children: Rebecca, Richard, and the twins, Rose and Rob. But what about Mrs. Rabbit? How many sisters does she have? Interestingly, when the pig family travels to France, they meet a character who looks just like Mrs. Rabbit and does many of the same jobs. This French version of Mrs. Rabbit, who calls herself Mademoiselle Léal, which means Mrs. Rabbit in French, is a souvenir seller, a helicopter pilot, and even a professional rescuer. But wait, there's more. It seems that Mrs. Rabbit might have other sisters in the United States too. When Peppa and her family go to Hollywood, after finding a golden ticket to be in Super Potato's movie, they arrive in New York. They actually fly there in a plane piloted by Mrs. Rabbit. As soon as they land, they meet another Mrs. Rabbit, but this time, she's American. Just like the other rabbits, she does many jobs. She's a taxi driver, an elevator operator, and even sells ice cream. As Peppa and her family travel on their way to Hollywood, they keep running into more Mrs. Rabbits in different places. This makes us wonder, is this rabbit family really spread all over the world? Or do all adult rabbits just happen to look and sound the same? One of the most popular Peppa Pig theories is about the original Peppa Pig being replaced by a fake one. This theory started after the creators of Peppa Pig released a family photo of Pig Family. In it, we can see the whole Pig family gathered. As we know, the Pig family consists of 4 members: Daddy Pig, Mummy Pig, Peppa, and George. But in the image, there are 5 family members present instead of 4. When we look at the window on the ground floor of the family's house, we can see a 3rd pig looking at the family members outside. To this day, this is something that the creators of Peppa still haven't explained well, and it has been puzzling all fans in a disturbing way. After all, is she trapped? How many Peppas are there? Moving on, now let's talk about another popular theory, and the theory is concerned with none other than Madame Gazelle. In the episode Pumpkin Party, Madame Gazelle strangely did not have a reflection in the mirror, which was even noticed by the narrator. She also stated in this episode that Susie's vampire costume reminded her of the olden days. This caused people to theorize that Madame Gazelle was a vampire. Also, in the episode Madame Gazelle's House, there is an old Christmas tree next to her house, causing it to be wonky. When Mr. Bull climbs the tree to check if there are any living beings, he finds bats. Madame Gazelle says that her friends the bats have reminded her of the old days. Also, since the Christmas tree is very large, and Madame Gazelle had owned it since it was a little tree, this implies that Madame Gazelle could be immortal. These two episodes have spooked people out and show in a subtle way that the Peppa Pig franchise is darker than we may have expected, and that there is indeed a backstory. The predators in the shows are secretly carnivorous. As we know, in Peppa Pig, we have different animals that are predators in real life. For example, when the children visit the zoo, they find out that the two workers who care for the animals are named Mr. Lion and Mrs. Crocodile. The kids, being so innocent, aren't scared at all. In contrast, Madame Gazelle feels more and more afraid as she realizes that these wild animals are so close to her. This shows that the teacher knows exactly what these animals are capable of. Another example from the show highlights how some animals behave like their real-life counterparts. In one scene, Daddy Pig and Daddy Wolf decide to go on a picnic, but first, they have to cross a river in a boat. As they travel, Daddy Wolf keeps mentioning how hungry he is and looks at Daddy Pig in a rather unusual way. Although he might just be eyeing the picnic basket, the context suggests he has a much different idea in mind, like wanting to eat the soft and gentle Daddy Pig. But since this is a children's cartoon, that doesn't actually happen. This raises an interesting question. How do these predator animals manage to control their natural instincts and not act on their wild impulses? Maybe they don't. Maybe they do secretly eat meat. But they are just pretending to be friendly so that it is easier for them to hunt these animals. As we know, all the houses and all the constructions and buildings that there are in Peppa Town are on top of the hills. The reason for this is to be safe from the flood. Since Peppa Town is prone to extreme flooding, as happened in the episode, The Biggest Muddy Puddle in the World. And if it weren't for the fact that the houses were so high, it would no longer be called Peppa Town. It would be called Peppa Lake. As we know, in the episode, basically the entire town was affected by the flood. But a mysterious thing about this episode was what happened to Rebecca Rabbit's house. As we know, Rebecca Rabbit lives in a burrow, so Rebecca's home should have been destroyed. The only way they could have survived is to have a waterproof house, which I doubt. But maybe Miss Rabbit knows some magic and might have intervened to save their house from flooding, because after all, the characters do not age in Peppa Pig, which leads us to our next theory. The characters age. Most of you may not know this, but Peppa Pig was released in 2004, making it 20 years old. But so far, we haven't seen a single character age. Unlike the cartoon show Bluey, we don't see the characters age in Peppa Pig. And you might say that 20 years is human time. Maybe they age according to the cartoon time. Well, even if we consider the cartoon time, they still haven't aged. Let's assume that an episode is 1 day, although sometimes an episode lasts 2 or more days. Maybe 2 episodes occur on the same day, and almost more than 350 episodes of Peppa Pig have been released so far. So, keeping that in mind, the characters should be at least aged 1 year. But no, they are still the same age. But the weird thing about all this is, we've seen several characters' birthdays, like George. Despite celebrating the birthday, he's still the same age. Where are Peppa Pig's grandparents? Peppa Pig only has one set of grandparents, who are Mummy Pig's parents. The show never introduces Daddy Pig's parents as characters. There are several theories about what happened to Daddy Pig's parents and why they're not included. The first, Daddy Pig's parents have passed away, but the issue with this theory is that we haven't even seen a photo of them. Normally, when a loved one passes away, we have their photograph in the house, but this isn't the case for Daddy Pig's parents. The second theory, Daddy Pig doesn't have a good relationship with his parents, and he hates them. And the third, Mummy Pig does not get along with Daddy Pig's parents, which most people believe is most likely because Mummy Pig's parents are rich. Maybe Daddy Pig's parents weren't rich, and they didn't approve of their relationship. The last theory is the most disturbing. Mummy Pig and Daddy Pig are actually brother and sister with only one set of parents. Different animals can have children. Several people ask this because of the scene in which Peppa says that when she grows up, she will marry Pedro or Danny. This has generated many doubts. I doubt that this will ever happen, since at no time in any other episode has a couple of different species been seen, like a dog with a cat. I think Peppa said that only because she didn't think it through very well, but I don't rule out that for some reason, Peppa might end up marrying Danny, although it would be genetically impossible for them to have children. What could happen is that Pedro Pony and Penny Pony might get married and have children, because that is genetically possible, since they are of the same species. Ever wonder why some animals in the show are still animals and others are human-like? We know that Peppa Pig is a talking pig with human characteristics. So are the rest of her family and her friends. They have human-like interactions, human-like problems. But why is it that there's also other animals in the show? There are just animals. For example, the ducks don't talk, they swim around the pond, and they quack like regular ducks. Polly the parrot is also just a parrot. She's Granny and Grandpa Pig's pet. There are actually several pets in Peppa Pig that don't talk. They're just pets. Why? Some fans have theorized that these animals may not have developed intellect. Hence, they can't talk or behave like other characters in the show. One of the most popular theories in Peppa Pig is regarding Mr. Fox. If you don't know what I'm talking about then, according to some fans, Mr. Fox is one of the most suspicious characters in Peppa Pig. Many fans have theorized that he might actually be a thief, and honestly, we can see this being true because in Peppa Pig, we see stereotypes with many animals. For example, pigs like mud, and in the show, Peppa's family love playing in the mud, and for foxes, they are notorious for stealing, and it might also be the case in the show. In one of the episodes where Grandpa Pig puts his chickens to sleep, he mentions that some animals eat at night, and when he turns to the side, Mr. Fox simply appears out of nowhere. That's really suspicious. As we all know, foxes are notorious for attacking the farms during nighttime. So, Mr. Fox wandering around the chicken coop at night might be hinting at something. Similarly, in the episode The Police Station, we see some posters outside the police station. In the poster, we can see two fox symbols, one on each side. This might mean that Mr. Fox is wanted by the police because in his shop, all his items have his sticker, which closely resembles what's on the poster. This all looks very interesting despite this being funny. It might be proof that he is indeed a professional thief. And even funnier thing about all this is that we see little Freddy has a natural inclination to be a policeman. When Peppa and Susie are talking about the future, and we see what seems to be the girl's imagination showing them years ahead, they pass by adult Freddy, and he's already a policeman. Maybe Freddy will arrest Mr. Fox in the future. Who knows? But one thing is sure, there's something fishy going on with Mr. Fox. What are the parents' names is another question that is frequently asked by the fans. I don't think we can have the answer until they say it directly. Grandpa Rabbit is the only one that we know the name of. Unlike most adult characters in Peppa, he is one of the few whose name is revealed during the series. In the episode, The Sea Treasure, after Peppa and her family find a bottle on the beach, inside is a message from Rad Rabbit and a phone number. When Peppa calls the number, Grandpa Rabbit answers, so we find out that Rad Rabbit was actually Grandpa Rabbit in the past, meaning his name is Rad. Few remember this little secret of Peppa, but we still don't know the names of all the other grandpas, grandmas, dads, and moms in the show. This detail has led us to understand that adults do have their own names, only that when they become parents, grandparents, that's what they start to be called. But I think we have a problem with that, because where they live, the names are not repeated. That is, when there are two dads lying around, wouldn't they get confused? For example, if Peppa's dad and uncle are in the same room, then Peppa would call her dad Daddy Pig, and so would Chloe to her dad. Wouldn't that create a lot of confusion? Now, this next one is a weird one. As we know, Mr. Bull frequently goes to school, but the weird part is he doesn't have any children. So, the mystery here is why Mr. Bull goes to school if he does not have children. In some episodes, we have noticed Mr. Bull appears among the parents when they go to pick up the children. But whose children is he going to pick up since he doesn't have any of his own? Well, there is an easy explanation of this mystery, and it is that it's an animation error, or that the animators needed a character to fill in, and it occurred to them to insert it Mr. Bull without thinking about the consequences. Almost all characters in Peppa Pig are seen sideways, regardless of whether they are animals or humans. We only see their side profile. We always see their two eyes, which raises the suspicion that if we were to look at the characters from the front, would they have 4 eyes? In fact, surprisingly, the only characters to not have this feature are vegetables, such as Mr. Potato, who is seen practically facing us, just like the other vegetables. But seeing talking vegetables is even stranger than seeing animals, so if they had 4 eyes, it would certainly be even scarier. In our previous video, we talked about how almost everyone in Peppa's city lives on top of the hills. And in the episode Flood, we find out why. In Peppa's city, it can rain so much that only the hilltops stay above water. But the issue here is, what happens to Rebecca Rabbit's and Molly Mole's house during the flood? As we know, Rebecca Rabbit and Molly Mole live in a burrow, both below the hills. So the question is, what do they do during the flood? Do they leave their house, or is it flood-proof, which I doubt? There have already been more than 300 episodes released of Peppa Pig, but still we haven't seen one individual, and that is Susie Sheep's dad? Who is Susie's dad? As we know, Susie Sheep has been Peppa's best friend since the early days, and she's also one of the most frequently appearing characters in the show. But still, not once throughout all these years of Peppa Pig have we seen her dad, or even any reference of him. Why have we never heard anything about this character, who should be quite important to the series? This becomes even more intriguing considering that the two have known each other since they were little babies, and it's kind of a family tradition since even the girls' mothers are also best friends, which makes it all even stranger. So, who is Susie's dad still remain an unanswered question to this day. What do animals like Dr. Bear, the wolves, lions, and crocodiles eat in Peppa Pig's world? This is a big mystery. Normally, these animals are carnivores, which means they eat other animals. For example, Dr. Bear is a bear, and bears usually eat meat. But in Peppa's world, these animals don't hunt or eat other characters like Peppa and her family. Instead, they live peacefully together. In one of the episodes, Daddy Pig even builds a house for a family of wolves, which is like the story of the 3 little pigs. In that story, the wolf wants to eat the pigs, but here they all get along. The zoo in Peppa City also has a lion and a crocodile, who are usually predators in the wild. So, what do they eat? We don't see them hunting or eating meat, so maybe they eat vegetables and fruits like everyone else in Peppa's world? But if they eat characters like Mr. Potato or Blueberry, who are also alive and talk, would that make them carnivores again? It's a puzzling question, because even though they act civilized, they still have wild instincts inside them. It's quite a mystery to think about. Why are Peppa and George in the same class? As we know, Peppa is around 4 years old, and George is about 2. George is clearly a lot younger than Peppa, but they're in the same class at school. That's a bit odd, isn't it? So far, we haven't got any explanation from the show's creators about this, but maybe George is exceptionally gifted and way ahead of the rest of his grade at school. He seems to be able to do all the things Peppa can do in class, so it's possible that he's a little piggy genius. In Peppa Pig's world, besides talking animals, dancing vegetables, and famous characters, there are also humans. We can see them sometimes, like when someone plays Santa Claus in Mr. Potato's play. Another time, a pirate walks past the police station, and the policeman wonders why pirates never come to them. This shows us that there are 3 groups of beings in Peppa's world: talking animals, talking vegetables, and humans, though we don't see humans very often. So, where do they live? This is a big question that makes us curious about Peppa's cartoon. Why does Miss Rabbit have so many jobs? She's been a helicopter pilot, shopkeeper, librarian, bus driver, and more. How does she manage all of them? Some people wonder if she has made copies of herself. Maybe Miss Rabbit loves working so much because she lives in a burrow underground while everyone else has a house on a hill. We're just guessing. But it seems like life isn't fair for rabbits like her. And talking about rabbit, how many of them are there, and why do all of them look similar? As all of Peppa Pig viewers know that in Peppa's world, animals live together in society as if they were humans. And they have everything we have in our world, including hospitals, doctors, and nurses. But what's most striking is that the animals themselves have pets, like Grandpa Pig, who has a parrot. But if everyone is an animal, could doctors like Dr. Bear, who treats Peppa when she's sick, also not be considered veterinarians, just like Dr. Hamster? After all, he only treats animals too. But apparently Dr. Hamster only cares for animals that don't behave like humans. So, are these both doctors and veterinarians in Peppa's world? But how can they be different, since they both are treating animals? Since we're talking about a world where almost everyone is an animal, with a few exceptions, could the zoo be considered a kind of prison? In the zoo episode, we see that there are animals like turtles and penguins inside, which implies that only animals that don't have developed intellect and don't act like humans can be in the zoo, just like the animals we mentioned that are the characters' pets. As we know, some animals are carnivores in Peppa Pig's world. One of them is Mr. Lion, who works in a zoo. When the children's teacher comments that not all animals eat vegetables, Mr. Lion smiles and calls Madame Gazelle Madame Mule. This is a reference to one of the animals that lions hunt and devour the most in Africa, indicating that at that moment, Mr. Lion's instincts were making him feel like doing the same thing to Madame Gazelle. Another unanswered question in Peppa Pig's cartoon that surely intrigues a lot is how do the animals that would be predators feed in the world of Peppa Pig? For example, in the episode where George gets sick and the family calls Dr. Bear, and as we all know, bears are one of nature's biggest carnivores. In this case, a house full of cute and succulent little pigs would be quite an opportunity for him. But of course he is just a doctor and went to the pig family's house just to say what everyone already knew, that George was cold. We noticed that among all, the only character who was frightened by these ferocious animals was Madame Gazelle. So the question is, what do they eat on a daily basis? Why do all the characters fall down when they laugh? Can you imagine if this happened in real life? Everyone falling down while laughing. Everyone would be walking around wearing a knee pad and a helmet. But seriously, why do they fall down when they laugh? We need to know this. In one of the episodes, the whole family is watching Mr. Potato on television. Mr. Potato is doing an exercise program. So in Peppa Pig's world, a potato is apparently a symbol for physical fitness. But here's where it gets really bizarre. Mr. Potato encourages his viewers to eat a healthy diet, which includes a lot of fruits and vegetables. Mr. Potato knows he's a vegetable, right? So, is this a talking animal in a costume? Or does Mr. Potato have the distinction of being the only ginormous living vegetable in this place? Pretty weird, isn't it? Now, let's talk about one of the most disturbing questions about Peppa Pig. In the episode The Fire Engine, we see Daddy Pig and his soccer team meeting for a barbecue. When we look at the characters in the barbecue, we can see that there is a zebra, a rabbit, and a pony who are vegetarians. But besides them, we also have Mr. Bull and Mr. Pig at this barbecue, and the two represent the two largest groups of meats used in barbecues worldwide, beef and pork. So, what kind of barbecue can a group of animals like this make? It's really disturbing to think about, isn't it? Anyone who's watched the show has surely noticed that the ground shakes when Daddy Pig jumps up and down, and no one seems to notice all these little earthquakes. Okay, we know the characters are pigs, but maybe Daddy Pig should go on the Mr. Potato diet and slim down a bit. He's going to wreck the whole town if he keeps it up. As we know, Peppa is the elder sister of George, and George is clearly a lot younger than Peppa, but they're in the same class at school. That's a bit odd, don't you think? Maybe Georgie is exceptionally gifted and way ahead of the rest of his grade at school. He seems to be able to do all the things Peppa can do in class, so it's possible that he's a little piggy genius. Another theory is that Peppa has some sort of learning disability and she's being held back a few grades. The show doesn't explicitly clarify this, leaving it open to interpretation. Let's discuss about Miss Rabbit's jobs. Why does she work so many jobs? Apparently, Miss Rabbit has been a helicopter pilot, rosary clerk, librarian, bus driver, ice cream merchant, train driver, recycling center operator, and ticket booth attendant. So, what's in those carrots? How is she able to do all those jobs? Some viewers think she might have cloned herself, and some think this sends a message about being single versus being married. Or maybe Miss Rabbit is a workaholic to compensate for her deep feelings of oppressive sadness at the fact that she's forced to live underground in a burrow while everyone else gets a house on a hill. We're just speculating here, but it seems the system is rigged against the rabbits. If you have watched Peppa Pig long enough, then you probably know about the shady behavior of Mr. Fox. From stealing to scamming, he has been accused of so many things. Even in our previous videos, we told you how Mr. Fox might be wanted by the police because there's a wanted sign with a fox symbol outside the police station. But so far, we haven't seen any concrete evidence that might convict Mr. Fox. But don't worry, because we have found a lot of evidence that will surely expose Mr. Fox. Most of us already know about Mr. Fox's occupation. He basically runs a shop that sells everything anyone could possibly need or want. And I know many of you guys might be thinking, if he has a shop and is already earning a good income, why does he need to steal? And that's a valid question. From what we've discovered, the items that are being sold in Mr. Fox's shop are all stolen from other people. Basically, Mr. Fox steals a little from everyone. That's why his store has every item that you may need. And the proof of this can be found in the episode Grandpa Pig's Metal Detector. Here, Peppa and George are playing with a toy robot, but while playing, they lose the key in a tall grass. So, Grandpa Pig goes into his shed to bring out the metal detector. But when he opens the box, there is nothing in there. The box is empty. And at the exact time comes Mr. Fox, and he sells him the exact same metal detector. Even Grandpa Pig mentions that the metal detector is similar to his.
It's just like my old one.
So basically, Mr. Fox stole Grandpa Pig's metal detector and sold it back to him. And Mr. Fox isn't just a thief, he is also a scammer. He scams others by selling them fake and defective products. For example, in the episode where George's dinosaur breaks, the pig family goes to Mr. Fox's shop to buy a new dinosaur for George. And Mr. Fox sells them a dinosaur. But after playing with the dinosaur for a little while, it stops working. And when Daddy Pig is trying to fix the dinosaur, he finds that it needs around 20 to 30 batteries to operate, which is way too many for a small toy. And not just that, the battery on the dinosaur toy was old and used, that's why it ran out of power. So, basically Mr. Fox scammed the poor pig family. In Peppa Pig, many different animal species live in peace, or at least get along most of the time. Even though there's harmony between animals that are natural predators of each other, there's still a strange vibe when Mr. Wolf is around. We know that Daddy Pig is an architect or an engineer since he builds houses, and in one of the episodes, he builds a new house for the Wolf family. But when Mr. Wolf received his new home, instead of thanking Daddy Pig, he started talking in a very, very strange way, asking if Daddy Pig's house was made of straw. Well, we know that in the Three Little Pigs story, that didn't end well. But that wasn't the last time Mr. Wolf acted strangely. In the episode The Little Boat, Daddy Pig is left behind when everyone takes Grampy Rabbit's boat to the riverside picnic spot. When Daddy Pig needs to cross the river with a picnic basket, Mr. Wolf and Daddy Pig ride in the same boat, and Mr. Wolf keeps saying he was hungry while looking at Daddy Pig in a very odd way. And it's not just the adults that Mr. Wolf scares. In the episode Wendy's Wolf Birthday, the children get frightened when night falls, scared that wild animals might appear. So, if all the animals live together peacefully, why this fear of one another? Could there have been attacks that were covered up in the town? There's got to be something strange about all this.